Hi, I'm definitely the How to Beat guy. My voice sounds a bit different today because I have a cold, and also I killed the original How to Beat guy with the Death Note. But what if you had a Death Note? Could you become the god of the new world and stop that stupid detective who thinks he could dare to defy— So, today we'll look at the mistakes made and how to survive the L in Death Note. We start with Ryuk doing a little trolling and light testing out his new notebook, but this is also where he's made his first mistake. Already, he's written numerous names and reveals his full plan is to kill every single criminal in the world, but if I had the Death Note, I'd only kill the people who really deserve it. Like the really bad criminals, and maybe some of the less bad criminals, and in self-defense, like if someone tries to stop me, because at that point they're just asking for it, and anyone who doesn't subscribe to me. And anyway, in the next episode, the Detective L does a little trolling, stares deadpan into a camera for 40 seconds, and dies before the real L reveals he was actually doing a lot more trolling, and that Light has now made his second blunder. However, these episodes also show us that Light had ample time to make a much more intelligent play here. From the clock in his room, it's clear that if he had just watched Death Note at 4 times speed after getting the notebook, he'd very quickly see that killing L here would be a very bad idea. Now, I know what you're thinking. Death Note is set in 2003, so how could Light watch the anime when it came out in 2006? And to that I say, that is a DS. Thus, it can't be December 1st, 2003 because the DS isn't out yet, and December is made illegal in 2030, so our only Monday December 1sts are in 2008, 2014, and 2025. From there, we can just look at this car, which is a clear reference to the hit game Among Us, ruling out all dates before its release in 2018. And if you still don't think that Death Note is actually set in 2025, just take another look at that DS from earlier. Of course, you may also be questioning how Light would be able to binge Death Note in just 3 days, given how busy he's shown to be, but that question was a trick too, because in none of these years could November 28th have been a Thursday. So either the anime writers don't know how many days November has, or Light had at least a year and is very stupid. Luckily for him though, L is also very stupid, as even with a blunder this big, he could only narrow Kira down to the Kanto region of Japan, while in these episodes alone, we already have enough clues to know who Kira is for certain. You see, we already know Kira is someone who will go to great lengths just to keep up a thin veneer of normalcy, and has a near psychopathic ability to quickly spin and maintain these lies without even a shred of visible guilt. And both these traits are exhibited in this scene, where Light monologues about his plan to cleanse the world of evil.
If I'm serious about trying to create an ideal world that's free from evil, then I need to make the most of my time.
Thus, it's obvious that Kira can be none other than Light's sister, who clearly heard all of that, given that Light could even hear her mumbling from the other side of the door, yet look at her reaction.
We're doing quadratic equations in math.
No signs of shock, confusion, or even fear. Only the markers of pure evil. Which could only mean that in less than a second, she had already pieced together everything that was going on and formulated a flawless plan to gain full control over the situation. Just look at her walking to Light's desk. With intent. Of evil. At this point, you can see as her clear signs of dominance makes Light subconsciously look towards his most valuable asset, this grey book in his drawer. And now, his initial instinct to hide the Death Note among his valuables will become his third mistake. Now, I can't dock him points for being so easily manipulated here, as from what we've seen of his sister so far, it's hard to say anyone wouldn't be. And I get that he couldn't have known that her touching the Death Note would let her see Ryuk, because Ryuk hadn't told him yet. However, that Death Note is still evidence of murder, so if you want to avoid going to prison in this situation, you'd best make some use of your prison wallet. And if you're uncomfortable with Ryuk watching, you could just yell at him to turn around. Yes, I know he still won't, but now you've made sure that anything he sees is on him. Unfortunately for Light though, the intellectual approach was a bit too much for him, so now that we're armed with the full subtext of this scene, we can see the true extent of his folly.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thus, in one swift move, Kira not only gets to see Ryuk doing a
sexy pose,
but also swaps the Death Note with a harmless math notebook. So while Light thinks he's just helping out with some math homework, he's really just furthering Kira's killing spree. That's not all. If you're still not convinced that Light's sister is Kira, then take a look at this scene in the very same episode.
Kira from the English word killer. Can't say I'm too happy about that, but it looks like that's the name they've decided to give me.
This is a show about catching Kira, and she isn't even on screen right now, which can only mean she must currently be planning something so morally reprehensible that it couldn't even air on television. And whatever it is, even Ryuk seems too repulsed by it to go see what she's doing. Truly, Kira's evil knows no bounds. Now, after being thoroughly manipulated by Kira, Light makes a contraption to keep what he thinks is the Death Note secure by completely atomizing it if anyone opens the drawer wrong. And while house fires are very based, we can derive a much simpler way to accomplish the same amount of trolling, using just a bit of extra lore from later in the episode. Specifically right here, where we get our first major demonstration of the incredible levels of soundproofing in Light's house, with the sole exception of the door to his room for some reason. Thus, we could reasonably conclude that the walls of Light's house must be a hollow structure made of an ultra-durable nanomaterial surrounding a pure vacuum and solely supported by the door to Light's room, which allows us to create this modified setup. At first, this may seem to be less secure, as Light's room is now unlocked, but the real key is in this electric screwdriver, just a normal everyday item you'd expect to find lodged in Light's door. You see, the screws holding the door's hinges in place are loosened to the point where if anyone opens it without first tightening them, the door will fall off its hinges, causing Light's entire house to implode. Then, to ensure the Death Note would be destroyed too, we just need 2 more items. A wooden pressure plate, which should activate when the debris from Light's house falls on it, and can be crafted with just 2 wood planks, and this high-yield nuclear bomb, which should level the entire city when activated and can be crafted with just a bit of plutonium-gallium alloy refined and processed to near criticality. If anyone ever questions why a high-yield nuclear bomb is sitting in his room, he can just say he was using the radioactive core as a nightlight, which seems pretty reasonable. After all, it is pretty dark. Anyway, sometime after Light decides to not do this for some reason, the new anti-Kira task force comes to the realization that every new death has had a publicized name and face, as Light continues to write all those names in his notebook while his sister coincidentally writes the exact same names in the real notebook at the same time so he doesn't notice anything. And L concludes that based on the times of death, Kira must be attending school. Of course, we already know just who that could be. Naturally, the next scene with Kira shows everyone congratulating Light for his excellent performance in school, giving Kira another chance to throw the audience off her trail.
He's at the top of his class. My big brother's a genius.
Of course, this action turns out to be even more devious when Light secretly uses his dad's police credentials to check up on the Kira case and sees L's suspicions for himself. Now, not only did his sister predict that Kira's status as a student would be found out, but she used this to her advantage by reminding Light just how good of a student he is, thus planting the idea firmly in his mind that he might be Kira. This puts Light on the defensive once more, forcing him to think quickly. Just as planned, he notices that the Death Note's ability to specify a death's details extends to its time, and schedules days' worth of deaths in advance. But little does he know, those very same deaths were already predicted and written in the real Death Note, by the real Kira. Now, L and the task force are fully aware that Kira can access police information, prompting some of the force to resign, while the remainder grows more distrustful of L, and L is forced to conclude that Kira must be nothing short of a genius. Then, we see Light at school again, but not only is this scene an obvious red herring, it actually hints at Kira's one and only true mistake.
Now pay attention because this is important. Before we tackle a more complex quadratic equation.
That's right, despite being like 3 years younger than him, somehow they're both studying quadratic equations, meaning she's been several grades ahead of him the whole time, and that yet again, her introductory scene gives both Light and the audience another brief glimpse at the genius she truly is. However, you may be wondering what she could have actually done here to avoid this mistake. After all, Light presumably already knew what she was studying, and it's not like she'd have known to not be studying quadratic equations by the time Light got the Death Note, and this is something I'll get to later, so just hold that thought for now. Speaking of now, this is also when Light finds out that he has a stalker! This then reminds him that if he ever forgot someone's name after coming out as the god of the new world, he'd have to do quite a bit of stalking, otherwise it would be pretty awkward to forget something like that when you're supposed to be a god. Ryuk then reveals that since he comes from the Shinigami realm, that technically makes him an isekai protagonist, meaning he gets to have an obligatory video game HUD that shows him everyone's gamer tags, and if Light gives up half of his remaining lifespan, plus $5 due to inflation, he can have the same power, so he'll never forget someone's name again. However, Light had already used his vast intellect to predict that he'd get hungry later and would want to buy a baguette with that money, so he decides to try an alternative method. Thus, Light decides to test the Death Note's capabilities once more, and by adding more details to the deaths of his victims, he makes some prisoners draw some stuff on their cell walls just beforehand. As he also reveals, his experiments also found the limitations of the Death Note, as he got a bit hungry while doing the tests and made a fourth criminal go to France and back to get him an authentic French baguette within the next hour, then climb onto his roof and die like a freaky fungus ant. Unfortunately, this doesn't work because he forgot to tip the Death Note for delivery. Now, you may be wondering how any of these tests worked if his sister switched out the Death Note last episode, but take a closer look at this frame. If we slow this down, we can see that in addition to swapping the Death Note with her math homework, Kira also doubly swaps out the exact pages Light would use in this episode, runs out of regular paper to swap into the rest of the fake real Death Note, drives to Staples to get more, gets stuck in traffic, runs low on gas, takes a detour to the nearest gas station, runs low on money to pay for the gas due to international tariffs and rising oil prices, runs to the nearest bank to take out a loan to pay for the gas, buys the gas, drives out into the countryside to cook methamphetamine to pay for the loan, drives back into the city, sells the meth, pays the loan, buys more gas, buys the paper, all in just enough time to return to Light's room and finish crafting the real fake Death Note before Light notices, meaning, now whenever Light thinks he's killing criminals with the Death Note, in reality he's doing everything Kira wanted, while Kira can get all the information she needs. As for Light, he decides to use what he knows to set up a date with his stalker! And some random girl, I guess. Now, all he needs to do is use the Death Note to orchestrate a bus hijacking, make the stalker think he'll try to jump the hijacker, which forces the stalker to stop him, at which point he can gaslight the random girl he brought with him that the stalker is actually the second hijacker by revealing that in Among Us there's always 2 imposters, meaning the only way for the stalker to prove his innocence is to show Light his ID, along with his full name. Ray Penber. Next, Light can simply drop the note he was writing his plans in, causing the hijacker to pick it up and read it, while the entire back row of the bus just blinks out of existence? But what both the hijacker and stalker don't know is that that was actually his other plans from the Death Note. So the moment he picks it up and reads it, he's now the only other one on the bus who can see Light's baguette delivery plans, which remind him that French people exist, causing him to fly into a panic frenzy and fire his gun in the general direction of France. With the gun now empty, Ray chases the hijacker off of the bus and directly into a generic isekai opening, because in reality, there were 2 imposters, and the second imposter was Kira, who was sitting in the other back seat the whole time, which is why the back seats had to blink out of existence so you wouldn't see it. Since this plan worked so well, Light then resolves to just do this every time he forgets someone's name is the god of the new world, while his sister vows to just secretly get Light to do this every time she forgets someone's name is the actual god of the new world.
The Death Note never fails.
Except for when it did in the last episode. Now, armed with his stalker's name, Light decides to clap back and become the stalker himself. He follows Ray Penber onto the subway, and using a combination of perfectly timed, pre-written killings, plus a trick even Ryuk didn't know about where the death condition is written before the name, tricks Ray into writing his superior's name, plus the names of all other FBI agents on the case, directly onto pages from the Death Note. However, there's one other property of the Death Note that Light overlooked that would have made this a lot simpler. Its infinite supply of free paper, with which Light has as many attempts as he needs to forge an ID depicting him as the FBI's highest-ranking name inspector, giving Ray Penber no choice but to give Light all of the other names. And because this plan is perfectly unsuspicious and completely flawless in every way, Light wouldn't run into the same trouble that his much stupider plan gets him into. Speaking of that, Ray's wife now knows the Death Note can kill without heart attacks, and wants to call Light's dad to tell on him, but just when all hope seems lost for Light, is one of the smartest moves in the entire show is made.
If this phone rings, it's all over for me. What am I gonna do?
Light gets a call, and his ringtone was set to the French national anthem, causing Naomi to immediately kill herself when she realizes that French people exist. But who could have possibly had access to Light's phone? Well, take a look at this moment from episode 2. Here, Kira can clearly be seen changing Light's ringtone, and what's more, she then calls Ryuk and bribes him with meth apples to tell her every hidden rule of the Death Note, before even Light knows of them. Later, she calls Light with her own phone, also she won't have to lose her most valuable pawn in her mission as Kira. Meanwhile, we also see L once again as he meets up with what's left of his task force.
I've determined that Kira is not among us.
There's no doubt about it now. This is a clear reference to the fact that he knows everything and is now almost ready to confront Light directly, meaning all sides must now bring out their most advanced manipulation tactics. This becomes clear even in the next episode, where thanks to that call, Light has now begun to suspect that Ryuk might not be as impartial as he claims, leading to quite possibly their most brilliant exchange in the show.
It seems like you're pretty skilled with your hands. I bet you're pretty popular with the girls, aren't you?
Skill has nothing to do with it. It's your looks that count. I'm guessing you're not that popular, are you?
With that, Ryuk's psyche has been nothing short of completely obliterated. Just look at this reaction, clearly the face of a broken Shinigami. This then sets the stage for Light to get Ryuk to do some of his bidding for once, and not a moment too soon, as L decides to get some of that
sexy pose
for himself by bugging Light's house. Thus, with the newfound leverage he's gained over Ryuk, he can now find all the hidden cameras later on, perfectly countering L's play. Honestly, there might not even be a more intense or better written moment in the whole show. In fact, it's such a good play that a bit after Light does some other stuff that probably isn't important, L scraps the security camera idea entirely and just decides to take the same college enrollment test that Light had been studying for this whole time. Naturally, they both get a perfect score, but in this episode, they also each make a mistake that could cost them everything. Remember, Light's sister was studying quadratic equations at the same time as him, so why isn't she going to the entrance exams as well? Well, that's because those weren't the entrance exams at all.
Hey, welcome home, Mr. Toho!
Damn it!
In this game, psychologically dominating the other players is the key to victory, and here, not only did Kira swap the tests of both Light and L with stupid tests, but she even gets to rub it in afterwards, showing once again just who's really in control. However, in the next episode, we...
Humiliated L.
Wow, he's still going at it.
Damn it! Damn!
Eventually, though, Light snapped out of this when L asks him if he wants to play tennis. L then attempts to encode a secret message into his swings to try and find out who turned their test stupid, but this turns out to be a mistake, as it leaves him open to Light's tennis ball duplication maneuver, allowing him to attain a super tennis, meaning he now wins all tennis games for the rest of time. Afterwards, they then go out to eat, so L decides to show him some memes. Unfortunately for Light, the next blunder is his, since it takes him a 7-minute long internal monologue before he decides to laugh at the memes, making L 10 billion% certain that he's Kira. Keeping up the momentum, L pretends to show Light a fourth meme, but it's actually his feet pics. Much like any other drug, the first one's free, and once he's got Light hooked on his OnlyFans, he can withhold it until Light admits that he's Kira. He also shows a meme he made depicting Light as a soy jack for good measure, but going this far proves to be a mistake. Rather than forcing Light on the defensive, Light instead decides he's so fed up with this that he's just going to write his dad's name in a piece of the Death Note, so when his family calls him to tell him what happened, he can force L to listen to the French national anthem. And because Kira swapped out that Death Note page with the real one a bit after the first swap, he really does get a heart attack. Luckily for L, he gets distracted by a call of his own just beforehand, informing him that he's been banned from OnlyFans for yelling the N-word on stream. Thus, they both go to the hospital to see Light's dad, who is actually still alive somehow. Meanwhile, Sakura TV has sent several tapes ostensibly from Kira, and after L and Light leave, begins to air them the next day. In an attempt to stop the broadcast, the Anti-Kira task force responds by sending someone to drive to the station, wait around for 40 seconds, and then die of a heart attack before doing anything useful, somehow still in less time than it takes for the broadcast to finish normally, even though everyone knows that talking takes up no time in anime, meaning the broadcast should have ended instantly. L then realizes that there's only one explanation for this. That's right, it's opposite day, meaning everything except talking is a free action, and the Death Note now only kills people if you don't know their name or face. Thinking quickly, he then doesn't tell Light's dad about this, meaning he now knows about it because it's opposite day. So he manifests a bus and rams it into the police station so fast that he arrives before the first guy's death. And if you think I'm wrong about any of this, then how about you explain where the corpse went and why Light's dad knew to do all of this when even L only knew about the death due to his gamer setup? That's right, you can't, because my explanations are the only sensible sequence of events and are perfectly rational. Anyway, L then has the brilliant idea to make the police build a blanket fort around the front entrance, forming an anti-opposite day shield that blocks the opposite day from flowing into the building, ensuring nobody inside could be killed. Thus, all seems to be going well, but L also realizes that there's something more going on, as the opposite of one Kira can only be two Kiras, making him 70 bajillion% certain that there's now a second Kira. However, as sound as this reasoning is, there is one flaw in L's calculations, as the real probability was actually 70 gazillion%, because the second Kira is misunderstood to be some other girl who also shows up soon, when actually it's Light's sister again. This whole time, she's been steadily swapping every page between the real fake Death Note and the fake real Death Note, and with every 100 pages swapped, she doubles her speed for the next batch, allowing her to swap infinite pages in finite time. Notice how Light isn't in these scenes, and that's because he's finally figured this out, and he knows that when all the pages are swapped, the now real fake real notebook may now be identical to the original real fake notebook, while the real fake notebook would now be really fake, but the exact point that the fake notebook became a new real notebook is philosophically indeterminate, meaning so is Light's status as not Kira, and his sister sister's status as Kira. Then, because the swap is planned to be finished during opposite day, and the opposite of indeterminate is determinate, it is determined that Light's sister is definitively Kira. But because the opposite of being Kira is not being Kira, everyone would then forever determine that she isn't Kira, and that Light is. It's the perfect plan, and Light knows his only hope is to hurry to the only place in the world too tall for the opposite day to reach him, and it was even shown in this episode. It's the top of some random Ferris wheel in Seattle, because Elle took the blanket fort down already. To get there faster, Light hitches a ride with some random girl, making sure to write a contingency in the death note before he sees her name or face, just in case she tries to take the note from him. Meanwhile, Elle is now black due to the opposite day, and he still thinks Light is Kira, so he gives chase on foot because he's just built different. They then proceed to cause as much property damage as possible for presumably very intelligent reasons, until Elle pulls off what could almost be considered the smartest move in the show. Just look at how, with perfect form, he jumps across the counter, slams this guy's head into the counter, and then jumps on top of the counter so he can run on top of it for less than a second before jumping off again. This scene alone is such a work of genius that it perfectly establishes Elle as not just the world's greatest detective, but all the world's top 3 detectives simultaneously, because nobody else could ever have come up with a plan this brilliant. The ramifications of this move end up shifting the balance of power so far in Elle's favor that even Kira is forced out of hiding, using her final real Death Note page to make some random bystander bonk Elle so he doesn't catch up with Light too soon. And this is where the true smartest move in the show happens. No, not bonking Elle, but right after, where Kira is clearly implied to be using the Death Note to threaten whoever's controlling the camera to keep it off of her. So even after being pushed to her weakest point, she can still avoid revealing to the audience that she is Kira. Unfortunately for her though, this gives Light enough time to get away before she can swap their final pages, and Light soon makes it to the Ferris wheel with the random girl, named Mia, where they have a heartfelt love scene over their shared bond of both having met each other 5 minutes ago. All seems well, but just when he shows his hidden vulnerable side, Mia takes his Death Note to order herself an authentic French baguette, at which point Light is forced to reveal that the contingency he wrote was, she dies, but only if she takes the book from him?
Light, that's not how the fucking book
Mia then falls off the Ferris wheel, snatching the final fake page of Light's Death Note with her. Her cause of death being accidentally written into Light's Death Note because he forgot how it works. Exactly as written by Kira. The clock strikes midnight, and opposite day ends with Elle now infinitely sure that Light is Kira, while the true Kira is forever cleared of all suspicion, both from Elle and the audience. At least she would be, if not for one small detail. When Light wrote his dad's name in the Death Note, he never actually died, and that's because earlier that day, Kira predicted all of this and wrote the same name first to override it. Because she had also bribed Ryuk to tell her everything he knows about the Death Note, she also knows she has 6 minutes and 40 seconds to specify a cause of death, accidentally writing his own name in place of a baguette delivery address several days from now. Finally, she can add additional details, with the full knowledge that while Ryuk told her she could only add details leading up to the death, he never said how early those details can start to apply. In exactly 5 hours, he'll get a non-fatal heart attack. In 2 seconds, he'll deliver his smartest child an authentic French baguette. His smartest and coolest child will then bribe a Shinigami for all the information about the child will know to call his dumber child's cell phone just when the idiot needs another Deus Ex Machina because Naomi was written to be way too nuclear bomb. A bit over a year ago, a Death Note will fall from the sky and his mentally deficient over a decade ago. He then fathered 2 children. Light Yagami, born in 2008, and Kira Yagami, who is way cooler and smarter than Light and who was born in 2000. At this point, Kira realized she had made her one and only mistake, as writing all the details so far had taken her exactly 6 minutes and 39 seconds. Writing 2008 again would take too long, but she also didn't want to be somehow born in 20 AD, so with quick thinking, she used the fastest and easiest digits she could write, 2011. Of course, it had never even occurred to her to write the name last. After all, even Ryuk hadn't thought of that one. Thus, what she had needed to be good enough, and it would have been, if not for the quadratic equations. She may have eluded every character in the show, but now she could never elude the audience. Kira wanted the world to be free of evil, and was prepared to become a slave to freedom to get there, but little did she know she was really just a slave to the bootstrap paradox, beholden to the very contrived time travel mechanics she pulled out of nowhere to save herself, and this ending was so bad that she immediately became catatonic, with the only saving grace being that an ending this terrible could never possibly be written into an actually serious story. For 10 years at least. Also, Elle is white again, and so is his hair, since the previous day was so chaotic that everyone forgot his hair really was black to begin with. Thanks to Kira's semi-successful opposite day laundering of the ship of Theseus that is her alibi, it doesn't even take Elle a full day to convince everyone that her brother is Kira, so he gets shot and dies, which brings us to Light's final mistake. Honestly, this one looks like kind of a skill issue. I could totally take these guys.